I thought it might be easier to answer Stephanie's question with a video. So this is a figure that was in our human population growth module, the content page. I cut off a stage 5 here to make the figure look more consistent with the one in your book that's on page 128. So on page 128 in your book, you've got something similar. It doesn't have the population pyramids, and it calls stage 1 the pre-industrial stage, it calls stage 2 the transitional stage, it calls stage 3 the industrial stage, and it calls stage 4 the post-industrial stage. I like this figure because it gives us a lot more information than the figure on page 128 in your textbook. The figure on page 128 shows us this information in the blue, that in stage 1 or pre-industrial societies, both the birth and the death rates are high. It shows us that in the transitional societies, the birth rates remain high, but because of things like better medical care, the death rates start to go down. So when there's that big of a difference between the birth and the death rate, so the birth rate is high, the death rate is going down, what we see is rapid growth. And this figure is showing us that in pink here. So this is the population growth, and we can see that it's really steep. It was stable in stage 1 because the death rate was still high. But in stage 2, that death rate goes down, so the population soars. Stage 3, which is the industrial stage, we see that at this point, with industrialization and opportunities for women and maybe access to family planning and contraception, we start to see the birth rate declining. So if we take a look back at the bar, there's still growth because there's still a pretty big difference between the birth and death rate, but it's starting to slow down. The slope of that line is getting steeper as we get close to this 4th stage, the post-industrial stage. That's when the birth rate is going to become similar to the death rate. And at that point, the growth is going to level off and that population should be stable. So I like this figure because it describes what's going on with the birth and the death rates here, and then it also shows us population pyramids that we expect to see for societies in each of these stages. We see a huge proportion of young people in this stage 1 or pre-industrial society. And that makes sense. We have a really high birth rate. We also don't see a lot of people getting over age 65, which makes sense because we have a high death rate in these societies as well. We see that as we move into stage 2, this transitional stage, the death rate is declining. So we see some older people, more older people in the population. The birth rate is still high, so we still have a triangle, meaning a larger portion of the society is younger. We see that as we move into the industrial stage, the pyramid is getting a little bit flatter. So we're starting to see the impact of this birth rate declining. So there aren't as many young people. There's not that many more young people compared to older people in the population. And that trend continues. In these post-industrial societies, we usually see pretty uniform distribution of the population by age until you get to the really old ages where the death rates are going to be a lot higher. So hopefully this helps explain how the demographic transition is related to birth and death rate, how it's related to population increase, and how it's related to these population pyramids.